are watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
For the community, by the community.
Celestial greetings. I'm Janet Booth, a professional astrologer from West Hartford, Connecticut, and welcome to my program on astrology called Looking Up. Today's episode is called Dichotomous June. That's a nice $5 word. Send you right to your dictionary. No, it's the adjective variation of dichotomy, things that are sort of contrasting to one another. And that goes very well with the sign of Gemini, and you can think of that as being two of everything. And the Roman numeral 2 is the symbol for Gemini, and it is the sun's sign for a good part of June, and then we switch into Cancer at the summer solstice. And I'm going to talk about that today in the summer solstice chart, as I usually do as we prepare for each season. But I wanted to mention as we get going here that one of my favorite writers growing up when we were forced to read all the classics in high school, and I don't know if kids still read this or not, Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, with a very famous opening sentence that is going to be quite true for dichotomous June. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So that's what we have coming up, some of the best and some of the worst, all balled together. So let's take a look at what's going on in June. You might remember from May that we had Mr. Mercury hanging out for an extra long time in the sign of Taurus because it was retrograde here. And retrograde is that optical illusion when a planet appears to backtrack or go in reverse through the zodiac as opposed to its usual motion. So we have a little dichotomy right there, don't we? So when Mercury is retrograde, it will hang out in the same, let's say, half of a sign for better part of 2 months, whereas usually it whips through a sign in about 3 weeks. And that's one reason why we kind of call things mercurial when they happen very quickly. And this is an earth sign, Taurus. We have two other things moving more slowly through earth signs. We have Pluto really slow going through Capricorn, and we have Jupiter in its 1-year visit to Virgo. And when we have things in all three of one element like that, it's potential to have that equilateral triangle called the grand trine. And that's one of the best things you can have in astrology. It means everything's harmonizing well and supporting one another. So Jupiter is kind of bigness. It's the largest planet. It has to do with growth and expansion. And Pluto is a planet about change and transformation and things coming full cycle and death and birth and letting go and getting rid of the things from the past. In fact, that third of the sky called trine between Jupiter and Pluto is going to be exact. Let me see if I can find that on my notes. Here it is, June 26th. You wouldn't want to see my notes. I know you can't see a zoom in on that, but it's just the circles of charts with my scratch astro shorthand all over them. So this is something that's been going on since last year in a sort of imprecise way, and that end part of June is when it has its exact point of precision, but it's strong from weeks before and after that. And basically, each of these planets can mean excess, overage, extremes. Pluto particularly is a planet of extremes, and then we get that expansion side of Jupiter. So the things that are kind of going good go even better. And when we have that grand trine with Mercury, Mercury is the planet of communication, but many people don't remember that it's also the planet of commerce. And if you think of Mercury as the messenger of the gods, he wasn't only conveying messages, but he might have been conveying items as well. So this has been kind of a good spring for commerce. And Taurus, the sign that Mercury is in, is the money sign. And it also has to do with goods and possessions and things of value, and especially things of lasting value, because Taurus is a sign of kind of things being persistent. Okay, so as Mercury now has come out of the backtracking, it moves forward through the range it backed up over, and then it finishes out Taurus, and it will go into Gemini, the sign that it rules. Let's see, June 12th, and here's an example of how fast it goes to the 29th of June. So that is only 17 days, not even 3 weeks. It's like, whew. No wonder we call Mercury quicksilver. Okay, and Mercury rules Gemini, so that's going to be a time where people's minds are really enlivened and quick, and words are flying fast and furious. But the point I wanted to make is before it gets into Gemini, when it's in Taurus and in that grand trine, that is sort of a fading energy that took place during a lot of May. And we still have it in place, kind of on the fading side, at the new moon, June 4th. And anything that is present at a new moon kind of reverberates through the 4 weeks that follow that are part of that lunar cycle. So we can still catch a little bit of the wave of some good commerce and practical communication, and taking good care of our valuable objects during the month of June for that cycle that goes June 4th to June, let's see, that will be, oh, it goes to July 4th, that's right. We have a new moon on our USA birthday this year, but that'll be a topic for next month's show. So another thing that's going on, and it's going to be kind of present for a lot of 2016, and we mentioned it a little bit before, but it bears mentioning again, is this square between Saturn and Neptune, and really Jupiter comes along and makes that into a T-square, which is kind of tough, or it brings turning points. Well, Neptune is dissolution and delusion, and things kind of being nebulous, maybe confusing. It rules fog, for one thing. Saturn wants things crystal clear. It is a control freak, and it says there's rules that we all have to live by, and consensus reality and all that kind of stuff. So it's sort of like reality and dreams bumping heads, and the reality principle gets washed out a little bit by that fog factor. Or we could say the things that we're really foggy about, we're trying to become more clear about with Saturn's help. Well, Jupiter coming in and making that into a T-square says, oh, let's just blow this wide open. And, you know, I love a quote from a colleague of mine, Carolyn Casey, out of Washington, D.C. She says, if something's a problem, make it bigger, and then you have to solve it. And that's what Jupiter does. So when we talk about things that we're unclear about, or things that we're deluded about and need to come into clarity, this is what's going on with Jupiter coming into this T-square. And what we're going to find is that at the full moon on June 20th, that T-square gets expanded because Mercury will have come into Gemini, and it's now making this into a cross. So Mercury, that communication planet, lining up in sort of a friction position with Jupiter, says we got to bring things out into the open, because Jupiter is very in the open kind of planet. And actually Jupiter rules Sagittarius, that's where Saturn is traveling. So there's kind of two things that says, let's take what's hidden or misunderstood and bring it out into the open and magnify it so that we can see it better. And there's going to be a lot of that going on at that full moon. In fact, that full moon, it has some really tougher energy than the new moon does. The new moon still has that grand trine going on in it. It also has a special kind of triangle called a quintile triangle, my favorite kind, which is composed of things that are a fifth or 2/5 of the sky apart, and those have to do with special talents and luck. And Jupiter's in that as well. And Jupiter is getting very close with something called the North Node. And there's a pair. There's a North Node and a South Node, always exactly across from each other. And these are where the intersections of the orbits occur, of the Earth going around the Sun. And while we're going around the Sun, the Moon's coming around us. So there's a Earth-Moon and Earth-Sun orbits that intersect, and that's where eclipses happen. But this North and South Node, it acts like a yoke in one sense. It kind of helps people bond, and it brings certain people together, especially when there's connections between their charts that involve that North and South Node. And it's also like a directional indicator. It says, where are we coming from? Where are we heading to? So we're heading in Jupiter's direction. And the South Node, where we're supposed to kind of release and get rid of and put in the past, that's hanging out over near Neptune. So it's definitely time to kind of release our delusions and take off our foggy rose-colored glasses and put on those magnifying glasses and see what's going on. Okay, so Jupiter is also in this quintile triangle, and it's going to be with Mars. Mars is currently going backwards, and that's been going on since April 17th, and it finally ends on June 29th. And Mars had gone up into Sagittarius, and then it turned tail, and it came back into Scorpio before the end of May. So it spends all of June, I believe, in Scorpio. And Scorpio, it's sort of a good sign for Mars, because back before we discovered Pluto and gave Scorpio's rulership to Pluto, Mars was in charge of Scorpio. And Mars, you know, it has that fighty side to it. And Scorpio, on the low side, has a revenge sort of side to it. But on the higher principle, it's sort of like surgery to get rid of a tumor. You know, you want to cut out the bad stuff just precisely enough to leave the good part. Okay, so Mars and Jupiter, when they're cooperating nicely, it says, let's take our higher principles of Jupiter and put them into action for Mars. And Jupiter is in a perfecting sign, Virgo. It's trying to make everything improved, as perfect as it can be. And Mars in Scorpio is saying transformation. Let's push the envelope and really get things rolling in that regard. And the other point of this quintile triangle is now a team-up of Uranus and Eris, both in Aries. Well, Eris is that new dwarf planet way out past Pluto, who was the troublemaker of all the gods and goddesses on the Greek, was it the Greeks? Olympus. Anyway, has a lot to do with being strong, independent woman, not really needing men. And when we put rebellious Uranus together with that, I think what we're going to see a lot of this summer is women getting very vocal and possibly carrying their placards and marching or who knows what about their rights. And we're going to also have the dwarf planet Ceres come together with them. They'll be like a trio by the time we get to that full moon at the 20th of June and the solstice that's on the 20th of June. So Ceres is like a great mother planet. It's named for the goddess of harvest and fertility. So we have a definite feminine planet, Ceres, with a definite feminine planet, Eris, with a definite rebellious planet, Uranus. And when they team up, I'm just really looking forward to seeing what comes out of this, because we've had a lot of chat, politically speaking, about a war on women. This to me looks almost more like women going on the warpath against the war on women. So kind of getting happy about that. We also have the, what was I going to say? Well, that same trio of Uranus, Eris, and Ceres, I see what they're doing. They are in the what's called a quincunx, 5 signs away from Mars. Mars rules Aries, the sign that they're in. So it's like this extra push, but it's got a little bit of mismatch going on. We don't want to be like so in your face with everybody that nobody really listens to us. So Mars in Scorpio says sometimes we got to go through things a little more through the back door, a little surreptitiously, you know, something about using wiles, let's say the feminine wiles. And oh, for you young girls, that's an old word for like flirtatious things. Okay, so there will be a brief point where we have the Sun and Venus will go through the right degree to make that one side of the 2/5. They come 2/5 from the other side, and it makes this isosceles triangle called the finger of God. And usually that means things go on a weird detour and end up a little different than where you want them, but it's going to be, you know, kind of favorable in the end. I was wondering if I can find the dates for that. Okay, I always consult my Janet's Planets. That's like my little Bible. I write it for myself as much as I write it for other people because I like to look up when things are happening for moments like this. Not seeing that right now. Oh, it's right around mid-month. It's around the 13th to the 19th or so is this finger of God. So do be aware that things might go kind of awry during that period. You know, with the finger of God, I always say weird event A leads to bizarre event B, and then we say, hey God, if everything happens for a reason, what's the reason for this A and B? But B leads to C, and C turns out to be cool, and you go, oh, okay, we had to go through A and B to get here to C. Okay, now a nice thing is going on through most of June, and that is that Venus and the Sun are traveling very close together from our viewpoint. And this happens when, if you figure, okay, I'm here on Earth, there's the Sun, you know, Venus is going around the Sun while I'm going around the Sun too. But there'll be times in which Venus comes between the Sun and me, and times when it's on the far side. And when it's on the far side and we're moving, you know, the Sun looks like it's moving, Venus is moving, they are moving at about the same pace. And from our viewpoint, it looks like they hang out together for weeks at a time. And Venus is the love principle. It's also peace and harmony. So here, while we have the feminine planets, a lot of them are on the warpath, we also have this energy that says, let's make sure we come at things from the heart. And the Sun is a lot of creativity and leadership and strong willpower. So we want to go after our heart's desire with everything that we've got. And that's a very nice combination. And we're going to see that it is extremely emphasized with this June 4th new moon. Because at that new moon, the Sun and Moon are at the same degree by definition always. And that's 14 Gemini in this case. And Venus is also exactly at 14 Gemini exactly that day. So the 4 weeks following that, strong for everything Venusian. Rules love, rules money, rules aesthetics, artsy things. In Gemini, it's oftentimes mental verbal arts. So if you are an aspiring writer, you may find that you have a really productive month or a lot of great ideas. And let's say, particularly once we get Mercury into Gemini, which is the mind and mouth planet in its sign of power and rulership, from, I said, the 12th to the 29th, that'll be pretty good. Now, the 29th is the same day that Mars finishes going backwards. It looks like it comes to a stop in its tracks. And many times we'll feel like we kind of come to a stop in our tracks when a planet, especially that's the motion planet, it's kind of like our motor and our accelerator. So, you know, don't expect a lot of productivity maybe right around the end of the month like that. And there was something else I wanted to mention in regards to this. Well, Jupiter is a main planet about conveying ideas far and wide. It rules the internet and all forms of media. It rules publishing, along with the sign that Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Of course, Saturn in Sagittarius, Saturn's main mission is manifestation and getting things in order, like I mentioned. But it sometimes acts like the brakes. And when we see Jupiter and Saturn in a square, that can also be a time in which there might be some writer's block. And that one was exact the 20th, no, that's not the 26th. Let's see, the 17th of June. So, oh no, that's the square between Saturn and Neptune. I think the Saturn-Jupiter square is done. I think it was in May. Well, anyway, end of June, I think, might be a time when you have a little bit of the writer's block, but otherwise, very productive time. You know, I found that this past weekend, well, I'm filming this on the 24th of May, we had a full moon in Sagittarius. And Sag, that's that sign of publishing and spreading your ideas. And boy, was I productive writing. I'm working on the 2017 Janet's Planets. And I'm excited that we're going to have another full moon in Sagittarius this month on the 20th. And this can happen because there's 30 degrees to a sign, but generally a moon cycle, or the time between two new moons or two full moons, can be more like 28, 29 and a half days on average, something like that. So we had the full moon on the 21st of May at 1 degree of Sagittarius, and then it's going to be at 29 degrees of Sagittarius on the 20th of June. Okay, and at that time, a full moon is always sun and moon across from each other. And if there's anything that's sort of making a T to them, that can be a sort of tension planet. And we have this asteroid, more than a planet, called Chiron, that is doing that at the June 20th full moon at 29 of Sagittarius. And Chiron is what shows us our weaknesses so that we can help improve them. So if you have some difficulties with communication, it's maybe going to become extra apparent in that time frame, or we might even say about 4 days before that, which would be the 16th, is going to be when the sun is actually in that 90 degrees position with Chiron, and that might be one of the tougher times. And that's very close to the 17th, which is when the Saturn and Neptune square is exact. And you know, that can be the kind of thing of, oh, you're trying to think of what that perfect word is, and it just won't come to you. It's eluding you, which is a very Neptunian thing. Oh, you know what else I wanted to mention? You know, sometimes I try to be as positive as I can about Mercury retrograde, but I did notice that during this one, it was taking place mostly in what's called the 9th house part of my chart, which is the natural kind of Jupiter Sagittarius place that has to do with internet and websites. And I always have my daily message from the Janet's Planets posted each day. It comes up on the front homepage. And also if you sign up for my blogs, it emails that message to you every morning. Totally fell apart. Not happening. My webmaster's still trying to figure out what went wrong with that. See, still having trouble speaking. Okay, that's kind of typical Mercury retrograde stuff. Just thought I'd mention that. Okay, so what else is on here? So as Mercury goes through its home sign of Gemini, it's going to be lined up across from that Saturn in Sagittarius. And sometimes Sag means big picture, and Gemini and even Virgo, the two signs that Mercury rules, and Virgo's where Jupiter is, it means all the little pieces. So one of the things that we're going to try to be looking at when we put on our magnification glasses is at how all the little pieces come together to make the whole. And that's going to be very prominent there right around that time of the June 20th full moon. But we also said that June 20th, just hours after that full moon, is the summer solstice. And just like anything that's present at the new moon will ripple effect for the 4 weeks following that of that moon cycle, anything that's present at the start of a season ripple effects through the 3 months that are that season. So we've got Venus and the Sun close together, so that's going to have a nice effect for the whole summer. Be like, not quite the summer of love, but I bet there's going to be some wonderful summer romances this year. And that grand cross I was talking about at that full moon is also going to be in effect for the whole summer. So, you know, magnifying of deceptions and exposing of those, and women on the warpath, and I would say Neptune has an emphasis here. When a slow planet is involved in a pattern like that, the slowest one usually holds the most weight. And Neptune, I always say it's like a two-sided coin. Fears on one side, faith on the other. So if fears are coming up for you, you need to flip the coin over and see what do you need to believe in more in order to make the fears kind of go away. And this is where we come back to this idea again of dichotomy. There, A, is always two sides to every issue, and B, we might get stuck in our side and not see it from the other side unless C, there's two people involved in a conversation so that we can get the back and forth dialogue going, and that helps us work through dichotomy. So di is the key word for June, and I didn't talk much about Cancer. That's our emotions. We're going to move from thought world more into emotion world. But we'll come back and talk about that more on the next episode in July of Looking Up.